G'day and welcome to another video with Better Pics. Hope this finds everyone well. Just wanted to show my editing process on this particular image today. It's a fairly well-known photographic spot on the east coast of Australia on the Gold Coast hinterland, up in some beautiful rainforest, not far from the coast at all. And it's obviously a cave and a waterfall. It's called Natural Arch for obvious reasons. So it's a very, very beautiful and relaxing and peaceful location that's visited by a lot of people, or at least it was up until the recent restrictions came into place. So you can see that, as I mentioned, it's a beautiful location, but certainly from a photography perspective, it presents some challenges because of the extreme difference in light or brightness levels between the outside of the cave and the inside of the cave. So it does present some challenges in terms of shooting as well as editing, and some considerations on what approach it may be. A common approach for shooting this location is to bracket exposures and blend to give more dynamic range to the image, and for example, taking one or two photographs for the brighter areas, so outside the cave here and also the waterfall, and then taking one or two exposures for the inner part of the cave where you can see it's very, very dark and not much detail in the shadow areas at all. If we have a look at our histogram up on the top right hand side, you can see there's a lot of shadow areas and a lot of bright areas, but very little detail in between. So with this image, I did actually shoot it in RAW, just to give me the most flexibility. And while I'm entirely supportive and have done in the past, photographed multiple exposures to increase the dynamic range by blending in post, I just wanted to show you what's possible with a single frame, because I think quite often people will blend multiple exposures when it's maybe not necessary. So with this video, I just wanted to have a look at the results you can get by pushing your RAW file that little bit further and working with the shadow and highlight areas. Excellent. All right, let's get into it. So first thing I want to do is straighten this image, because it is pretty obvious that it's a little bit crooked. So you can see that, it's definitely leaning down on the left-hand side. So what I'm going to do is just select my Align tool, which the shortcut is A, and I'm just going to draw a line that's slightly down on the left-hand side, slightly up on the right-hand side, and just make that quick little adjustment. Now, I could have shot this image better in terms of straightness, and I'm not going to crop it any further or rotate it any further, because I don't want to crop the edges too much more. So I'm going to leave it as it is, but fully acknowledging that it could be straighter. So that's my bad and my mistake. All right, so let's have a look at the options. The first thing I'm going to do is drop my highlights and increase my shadows, just to see what effect that has straight away. And you can see with the adjustment of two sliders, the highlights and shadows, I've pulled back the detail in the brighter areas and I've raised the detail in the shadow areas, and that's an immediate improvement. You can see not only with the histogram, but also the detail in the image that you can see in front of you. The next adjustment that I'm going to make is color temperature. You can see that it doesn't have a great sort of color range at the moment, so I'm just going to firstly increase the temperature. Now, all of these adjustments I may come back and revisit, but I'm just going to make those adjustments for now. And just to warm it up a little bit, basically what I'm doing is trying to recreate an image that better matches what it was that I saw with my own eyes. Obviously our eyes have a far better dynamic range and ability to see bright and dark areas than our cameras do, at least at present. So I don't want to create an unrealistic hyper HDR image, but I certainly want to retain detail in shadow and highlight areas, because that's what I saw. And certainly in terms of tonal range, that's getting closer to what I experienced at the time. I'm just going to apply a tiny bit of sharpening and some masking. Just pushing down my Alt key, I can see where that masking is blocking out the sharpening effect. I'm not going to apply any noise reduction because it was shot at ISO 50, but I might revisit that a little bit later on, depending on how the shadows are holding up. Whenever you increase shadows, you tend to get a little bit of noise, so it's worth just looking at that with a little bit more of a critical eye, but as I mentioned, we'll get to that a little bit later. Next one is I'm going to add or check remove chromatic aberration. Just do a very quick check just to make sure that yep, that seems to have taken care of all of that. So no further adjustments on chromatic aberration on the manual tab for now. Alright, let's go back, and nothing there at this stage. Alright, I'm going to continue working on the colour because I'm still not 100% sussed on the colour, but before I make too much of a big further adjustment, I'm just going to add some vibrance and saturation. I'm going to add quite a bit because I do photograph on quite a flat profile, and it does require quite a bit of colour intensity to be added back in. Again, I'm going to just increase that colour temperature just to see what effect I get. Yep, that's pretty good at this stage. What I'm seeing is the outside colour there is pretty close to where I want it to be, but it's still quite cool on the inside here, so I might add, with selective adjustments, some selective colour temperature adjustment in a little bit by using that adjustment brush. So far I haven't actually touched exposure in the traditional sense. I've only adjusted highlights and shadows, which you could argue is an exposure adjustment, but the actual exposure slider, I'm just going to have a look at that. I'm just going to give that a little bit of push, say plus 40, and I'm going to drop those highlights a little bit more. What that does is just bring up the shadow areas that little bit more, which looks great. I'm really happy with that. So what I'm going to do from here is move over to my adjustment brush because I want to make some selective adjustments to different parts of the image. The first one is I'm going to drop the exposure just a little bit, say minus 25, and I'm just going to address the exposure over here on the outside of this image just because I want to drop that just a little bit. It's getting a little bit too bright for my liking. Yeah, that looks good. And the next adjustment I'm going to make, I'm going to remove that exposure adjustment, and I'm just going to increase the temperature by plus 10, and I'm just going to paint in a little bit of warmth around this waterfall and this rock because it's a little bit cool for the look that I want to create. There we go. Much better. Yep, that's great. Very happy with that. I'm just going to turn off the overlay so those adjustment points that inherently appear aren't distracting. Excellent. All right, let's have a look at the before and after. Quite amazing. So you can see, even with just a few adjustments, both in brightness, selective brightness, and color, as well as vibrance and saturation for color intensity, we've been able to make some drastic changes to this image, and immediately it is closer to where I remember, or what I remember seeing when I visited this location. And the color temperature looks much better. You know, the greens of the forest and the rock, the color of the rock is far closer to a natural result, or certainly the result, or how the scene looked on the day. I've recovered a lot of highlights. You can see that there's still a little bit of detail lost there in the base of the waterfall, but that's not entirely uncommon for a single exposure in such a situation. But overall, there's really beautiful texture and different tonal values in that water that's coming through. There wasn't a huge amount of water on this particular day, but yeah, you can see that it does look really good. Let's just have a look at that a little bit closer. So yeah, that looks great. Very happy with that. Again, a little bit of detail lost there, but nothing too major to get concerned about. That would be easily fixed within Photoshop just by adding a little bit of tone back to that area. That would be a very, very easy fix indeed. All right, so outside looks really good. I'm really happy with that. That looks how I would photograph it normally. I'm going to make some further adjustments, but for now I'm happy with that. Let's have a look at the shadow areas. And you can see what I mean. You can see what I mean in the shadow areas, because I've had to bring those shadow areas up quite a bit. Now, the detail's good, but it has resulted in quite a bit of noise and color noise in the shadow area there. So heading over to heading over to detail, we're just going to add a little bit of noise reduction. You can see by adding that color, because of the nature of that noise in the shadow areas, that's really helped to reduce that quite a bit. Now, while this shows the power of a raw image and the ability to retain or look and find detail in the shadow areas is really strong, it's also a solid argument for using multiple exposures in a situation like this. Now, this is an extreme situation. It is super dark in this cave, and then obviously the normal level of brightness outside. So I would, in this situation moving forward, if I was creating this image as an image that I intended to print up really large, lots of detail, I would do a multi-exposure blend, because using this camera, and obviously it's going to be different for different cameras, but using this camera in such an extreme situation, it does result in quite a bit of noise and quite a bit of detail loss in the shadow areas. You can see that the detail in that shadow area isn't as nice, isn't as clear and clean as the outdoor area. Obviously, the highlights are always going to handle far better than the shadow areas. So I still definitely stand by what I said initially, where, you know, there's so much more that we can do with a single frame, especially when shooting raw. And you can see just with those adjustments, so it's a plus 73 in the shadows and a minus 79 in the highlights. They're pretty extreme adjustments. It's possible, but depending on the situation, you may still want to go down the path of multiple exposures. Obviously, if that's possible for what you're doing. Obviously with this one, it was shot on a tripod, so that would be possible, but there's some pretty solid results. If I'm in a rush, I can definitely take a single frame. You can see how much cleaner the brighter areas are there compared to the shadow areas. But if I have time and I have the intention of creating a large print, definitely worth doing a multi-exposure blend. This is a situation where it would work well. Alright, so I'm just going to make some further adjustments to colour. I'm going to go to hue, saturation and luminance. And under luminance, which is also brightness, I'm just going to drop the green just a little bit. And under hue, I'm going to change that hue of the green just a little bit, so that we get those more intense, beautiful rainforest greens that we normally see when we're in a rainforest, funnily enough. Before and after, fantastic results. Fantastic detail everywhere, shadows and highlights, considering it's from a single frame, and beautiful texture in the water in the rainforest, as well as smoothness in the water, and overall, a great result. So you can see, as I mentioned earlier, I really haven't had or made big adjustments to this image. Yeah, the usual adjustments that you would make whenever editing an image, just pushed a little bit further because of the nature of this photograph. But the results are pretty good, so very happy. Alright, thanks again for stopping by, guys, and hope the editing process for this image has given you some ideas on how to handle extreme contrast or high contrast or high bright and dark areas of a particular photograph. And of course, there's always ways that you can take your images further. So be sure to practice and look for the results that you're hoping to achieve. All right, take care, guys. Thanks again for stopping by, and we'll see you in the future.